Let him appear. The meeting between the solicitors suggested to Viner and to Lord Ellingham, who looked on curiously while they exchanged formal greetings and explanations, a certain solemnity. Each of them seemed to imply in look and manner that this was an unusually grave occasion. And Mr. Carless, assuming the direction of things, became almost judicial in his deportment. "Well, gentlemen," he said, when they had all gathered about his desk, "Lord Ellingham has informed me of what passed between you and himself at his house yesterday. In plain language, the client whom you represent claims to be the Lord Marketstoke who disappeared so completely many years ago, and therefore the rightful Earl of Ellingham. Now, a first question: do you, as his legal advisers, believe in his claim?" "Judging by the proofs with which he has furnished us, yes," answered Methley. "There seems to be no doubt of it." "We'll ask for these proofs presently," remarked Mr. Carless. "But now a further question. Your client, whom we'll now call the claimant, had, I understand, no desire to take up his rightful position, and suggests that the secret shall remain a secret, and that he shall be paid £100,000 to hold his tongue?" "If you put it that way, yes," replied Methley. "I don't know in what other way it could be put," said Mr. Carless grimly. "It's the plain truth. But now, if Lord Ellingham refuses that offer, does your client intend to commence proceedings?" "Our instructions are yes," answered Methley. "Very good," said Mr. Carless. "Now, then, what are these proofs?" Methley turned to his partner, who immediately thrust a hand in his breast pocket and produced a long envelope. "I have them here," said Woodlesford. "Our client entrusted them to us so that we might show them to Lord Ellingham, if necessary. There are not many documents, they all relate to the period of our client's life before he left England. There are 1 or 2 important letters from his father, the 7th Earl, 2 or 3 from his mother. There is also his mother's will. There is 1 letter from his younger brother, to whom he had evidently, more than once, announced his determination of leaving home for a considerable time. There are 2 letters from your own firm, relating to some property which Lord Marketstoke disposed of before he left London. There is a schedule or memorandum of certain personal effects which he left in his rooms at Ellingham Hall. There is also a receipt from his bankers for a quantity of plate and jewellery which he had deposited with them before leaving. These things had been left him by his mother. There are also 2 documents which he seems to have considered it worthwhile to preserve all these years," concluded Woodlesford with a smile. "One is a letter informing him that he had been elected a member of the MCC, the other is his commission as a Justice of the Peace for the county of Buckinghamshire." As he detailed these things, Woodlesford laid each specified paper before Mr. Carless, and then they all gathered round, and examined each exhibit. The various documents were somewhat faded with age, and the edges of some were worn as if from long folding and keeping in a pocketbook. Mr. Carless hastily ran his eye over them. "Very interesting, gentlemen," he remarked. "But you know, as well as I do, that these things don't prove your client to be the missing Lord Marketstoke. A judge and jury would want a lot more evidence than that. The mere fact that your man is in possession of all these documents proves nothing whatever. He may have stolen them." "From what we have seen of our client, Mr. Carless," observed Methley, with some stiffness of manner, "there is no need for such a suggestion." "I dare say we shall all see a good deal of your client before this matter is settled, Mr. Methley," retorted Mr. Carless. "And even when I have seen a lot of him, I should still say the same. He may have stolen them. What else has he to prove that he's what he says he is? He is fully conversant with his family history," said Woodlesford. "He can give a perfectly full and, so far as we can judge, accurate account of his early life and of his subsequent doings. He evidently knows all about Ellingham Hall, Marketstoke, and the surroundings. I think if you were to examine him on these points, you would find that his memory is surprisingly fresh. I have no doubt that it will come to his being examined on a great many points and in much detail, said Mr. Carless with a dry smile. Of course, I shall be much interested in seeing him. You see, I remember the missing Lord Marketstoke very well indeed. He was often in here when I, as a lad of 19 or 20, was articled to my own father. And now, gentlemen, I'll ask you a question and commend it to your intelligence and common sense. If your client is this man he claims to be, why didn't he come straight to Carless and Driver, whom he would remember well enough, instead of going to Methley and Woodlesford? Come, now. Neither visitor answered this question, and Mr. Paul suddenly turned on them with another. Did your client mention to you that he knew Carless and Driver as the family solicitors? He asked. No, I can't say that he did, admitted Methley. After all, 35 years' absence, you know. You said just now that his memory was surprisingly fresh, interrupted Mr. Paul. Surely, replied Woodlesford, surely you can't expect a man who has been away from England all that time to remember everything. I should have expected Lord Marketstoke to have gone straight to the family solicitors, anyway, retorted Mr. Paul. Obvious thing to do if his story is a true one. Woodlesford glanced at his partner, and repossessing himself of the documents, began to arrange them in the envelope from which he had drawn them. We cannot, of course, say positively who our client is or who he is not, he said. All we can say is that he came to us with an introduction from an old client of ours whom we knew very well, and that his story seems to us to be quite credible. No doubt he can bring further proof that he did not come here in the first instance. I'll tell you why I, personally, am very much surprised that he didn't, interrupted Mr. Carless. You told Lord Ellingham yesterday that your client saw no end of advertisements for him at the time of his father's death. Now, we, Carless and Driver, sent out those advertisements. Our name was appended to every one of them, wherever they appeared. Why, then, when this man, if he is the real man, returned home, did he not come to us? For there are 3 persons in this office who, but wait. He touched a bell. The clerk who had announced Methley and Woodlesford put his head in at the door. Ask Mr. Portlethwaite to come here, commanded Mr. Carless. And just find out if Mr. Driver is in his room. Portlethwaite can tell me when he comes. An elderly, grey-haired man presently appeared and closed the door behind him as if aware of the sacred nature of the proceedings. Mr. Driver is out, Mr. Carless, he said. You wanted me, I think? Our senior clerk, observed Mr. Carless, by way of introduction. Portlethwaite, you remember the Lord Marketstoke who disappeared some 35 years ago? Mr. Portlethwaite smiled. Quite well, Mr. Carless, he answered. As if it were yesterday. He used to come here a good deal, you know. Do you think you'd know him again, Portlethwaite, after all these years? Asked Mr. Carless. 35 years, mind. The elderly clerk smiled more assuredly than before. Then he looked significantly at a corner of the room, and Mr. Carless took the hint, and rising from his chair, went aside with him. Portlethwaite whispered something in his employer's ear, and Carless suddenly laughed and nodded. To be sure, I remember now, he said aloud. Thank you, Portlethwaite, that's all. Well, gentlemen, he continued, returning to his desk when the clerk had gone. I think the best thing you can do is to bring your client here. If he is the real and genuine article, he will, I am sure, be very glad indeed to meet 3 persons who knew him quite intimately in the old days, Mr. Driver, Mr. Portlethwaite, and myself. And I really don't know that there's any more to do or say.